The ballroom sparkled like a starry night, crystal chandeliers scattering light over polished marble floors. Tables were draped in ivory silk, each centerpiece a towering cascade of white roses and orchids. Outside, the garden shimmered under fairy lights, the fountain gurgling softly as if whispering secrets to anyone who cared to listen. Yet amid the opulence, a tension clung to the air like the faint smell of smoke before a storm. My daughter Emma looked radiant in her ivory gown, the delicate lace hugging her frame while her veil framed her face like a halo. She smiled at me with a nervous brightness that did little to hide the unease beneath. I squeezed her hand, silently telling her that everything would be fine. But deep down I knew better. Across the room, the man who had captured my daughter's heart, and whose charm had won us over, if reluctantly, was holding court among the guests. My son-in-law, Daniel, was tall, with that air of calculated confidence that comes from a lifetime of privilege. He laughed easily, his hand resting possessively on Emma's waist, the sort of casual display meant to remind everyone of the world he believed he owned. And then, as if the moment had been orchestrated for maximum humiliation, he turned his eyes toward a man standing quietly by the edge of the ballroom, a man who had served our family faithfully for over a decade. He's just a servant, Daniel said, his voice carrying over the hum of polite conversation, deliberate and sharp, each word a blade meant to cut. The room froze. Some guests shifted awkwardly, unsure how to respond. A few suppressed smiles. And the man Daniel had dismissed, a man named Adrian, simply straightened his posture, his eyes calm but unreadable. He didn't flinch, didn't defend himself. There was something in that stillness that made the words hang heavier than any shouted insult ever could. I felt my face heat, a mixture of fury and disbelief coursing through me. How dare he? How dare he humiliate a man who had been part of our family, who had cared for my daughter like a brother, and for me like a son? Emma, unaware of the full weight of the insult, tilted her head with polite confusion. Daniel, she murmured, but he waved her concern away with a charming smile that didn't reach his eyes. I opened my mouth to intervene to defend Adrian, but before I could speak, the whispers began. I didn't know he worked here. I thought he was a family friend. The murmurs rippled through the crowd like water over stones. Adrian, however, did not respond to the whispers. He simply stood there, serene, almost regal in the quiet dignity that no luxury or title could ever grant. There was a glimmer in his eye, subtle but unmistakable, a hint that this was not a man to be underestimated, and that Daniel's arrogance had perhaps just awakened a storm. For the first time, I noticed the subtle details of Adrian's appearance, not the simple attire of a servant, but the understated elegance of someone who carried himself with confidence. The faint gleam of a gold watch, the tailored cut of his suit beneath his servant's apron details that spoke of careful choices and hidden wealth. And something else, something deeper, the aura of someone who had been tested, who had risen from far less, who now possessed a power that no title could measure. Daniel continued to mingle, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension he had set in motion. He laughed at a joke, gestured with his wine-glass, and glanced smugly at the other guests, as if he alone defined success. Yet, even as he basked in his selfish assuredness, I caught a fleeting shadow of unease cross his face. Perhaps he sensed, in some instinctive way, that he had underestimated the man he had just belittled. The rest of the evening carried on, a delicate dance of polite conversation, forced smiles, and clinking glasses. But the words Daniel had spoken lingered, like smoke that refuses to dissipate, and in that smoke I could feel the spark of something dangerous, something that would not be easily extinguished. Adrian stayed near the periphery, observing with a quiet patience that made my chest tighten. He was calm, almost amused, as if he had known this moment would come all along. And I realized, with a mixture of awe and fear, that Daniel's words had done more than insult a man. They had awakened a force that could change everything. As the night wore on, I caught Adrian's eye across the room. He nodded ever so slightly, a gesture so subtle that no one else noticed it. But it was enough. A silent promise passed between us. This was far from over. The wedding, with all its glitter and laughter, was a stage, and the first act of reckoning had just begun. And deep in my heart, I knew that when the storm finally broke, it would be beautiful and devastating. The morning after the wedding was quiet in the way that only early sunlight can be, soft, golden, and deceptively peaceful. Yet for me, the peace was shattered by the echo of Daniel's words. Asterisk, he's just a servant. Asterisk, every syllable replayed in my mind like a cruel refrain. I could still see Adrian standing there, calm, unreadable, yet something in his eyes told me he had already taken Daniel's insult as a challenge rather than a humiliation. Later that day, Adrian appeared in the library, a place he frequented when he needed a quiet moment away from the household chaos. He sat across from me, not with the meek humility I had always known, but with a composed, almost predatory calm. "You saw the way he humiliated me," I said, my voice tight, not with anger at him, but at the audacity of someone so arrogant. Adrian's lips curled into a faint smile, gentle but knowing. "I saw it," he said softly, his voice carrying that calm authority that made people lean in, listen, and trust. "And it doesn't matter." I frowned. "Doesn't matter. He humiliated you in front of everyone. Everyone." He leaned back, crossing one leg with the casual elegance of a man who owns more than anyone can see. "Daniel thinks wealth defines a person. He doesn't understand power or influence or subtlety. He underestimates people. That's his weakness and my advantage." I blinked. "Your advantage? You're a servant." He chuckled, but it wasn't a mocking sound. It was rich with the wisdom of experience. "A servant to some, yes. But servants can see the world in ways the wealthy never can. I've watched, waited, and learned, and now the time to act has come." My heart quickened. You mean revenge, not revenge," Adrian said. He paused, letting the word hang in the air like a fine mist. "Justice. And sometimes the most effective revenge is the quiet kind. One that doesn't scream or rage, but instead unfolds slowly and beautifully." He didn't explain further, but the certainty in his eyes told me everything. Adrian was no longer the man I had known. He had become something more, someone dangerous, in the sense that a well-trained force of nature is dangerous. Over the next few weeks, his transformation became clearer. Adrian moved with renewed purpose, leaving behind the quiet subservience he had always worn like a cloak. He began traveling, speaking with people I didn't recognize, and making arrangements that he never fully explained to me. Yet each time he returned home, he carried himself with a confidence that was impossible to ignore. One evening, as we walked through the rose garden, he spoke again, this time with a vulnerability that surprised me. "You know, when I came here, I had nothing but skill, ambition, and a little luck. I learned from every slight, every insult, every dismissal. I studied the world, its people, its weaknesses. I worked in silence while others flaunted their wealth and power. And now, I am ready to step into the world on my own terms." I stopped walking, my eyes searching his. You're saying that you've built something for yourself." He nodded slowly. "Something that no one in this room would suspect. And when the time comes, everyone will see that the person Daniel tried to humiliate is not only my equal. He's above him in every way that truly matters." I felt a shiver run down my spine. Part of me was terrified of what Adrian was capable of. Another part was filled with awe and admiration. Here was a man who had endured every slight, every dismissal, every whispered insult, and had turned it into fuel. Fuel for power, for dignity, for vengeance. In the weeks that followed, Adrian's presence became a quiet force within our home. He moved through life like a shadow, always observing, always calculating. And though he never spoke of the exact plans he was crafting, I could sense them forming like a slow, deliberate storm. One afternoon, he brought a stack of documents into the study, placing them carefully on my desk. "I want you to understand," he said. "This isn't just about Daniel. It's about a world that judges people by their appearance, their titles, or their wealth. It's about proving that dignity, intelligence, and integrity can't be bought or inherited. They must be earned, and sometimes they must be revealed." I traced my fingers over the papers, curious, fearful, and exhilarated all at once. They were financial statements, press clippings, business contracts, and philanthropic records, evidence of Adrian's hidden empire, the very life he had built quietly, unnoticed by those who considered him just a servant. "Daniel won't see it coming," Adrian said softly. "He thinks the world bends to wealth and status, but the true power lies in influence, in vision, in the ability to create opportunities where others see nothing. And when the time is right, he will fall." I felt a strange mix of emotions: pride, fear, anticipation, and a subtle joy that perhaps some might call wicked. For the first time, I saw the outline of the storm that was coming, a storm that would not be shouted or flailed, but revealed with elegance, precision, and devastating impact. And as I watched Adrian leave the room that evening, I realized that the spark of revenge had already been lit. It wasn't anger driving him. It was strategy, patience, and a deep understanding that the sweetest triumph is the one that unfolds when your enemy least expects it. For Daniel, the game had already begun. The wedding reception was in full swing, the air thick with perfume, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. Crystal chandeliers scattered fractured light across polished marble floors, casting diamonds of reflection that danced on the faces of the guests. The orchestra played a gentle waltz, a melody so sweet it masked the undercurrent of tension simmering beneath the surface. Daniel, my son-in-law, was at the center of it all, regaling a cluster of guests with tales of his family's wealth, his own accomplishments, and subtle digs at anyone he deemed beneath him. Every word was calculated, every gesture designed to impress, to dominate, to remind everyone who truly mattered. And in that moment, I realized just how blind he was to the storm that Adrian had been quietly preparing. Adrian entered the ballroom later that evening, not with a grand announcement or fanfare, but with the quiet confidence of a man who knew exactly when to strike. He moved with effortless grace, acknowledging polite nods and smiles without haste, without need for approval. The guests barely noticed him at first. After all, they had long dismissed him as just a servant. And then it happened. Daniel raised his wine glass, a smug smile on his face. "And so, as we celebrate this union, we should remember that life rewards those who are born into it, and those who know how to seize it, though the two are rarely the same." His laughter carried through the room, smooth, arrogant, and entirely unaware of the impact it would soon have. A voice rang out from the far end of the ballroom. I saw him in Forbes. The words cut through Daniel's speech like a knife. The room froze. Guests turned, their faces registering shock, disbelief, curiosity. Whispers began, soft at first, then louder as realization spread. What?" Daniel stammered, his wine glass trembling in his hand. He took a step back, his perfectly rehearsed confidence faltering. Adrian stood tall, his expression serene, almost amused. "You underestimated me," he said, his voice calm but commanding, carrying easily across the hushed room. "I've been underestimated all my life, and yet here I am." A guest handed a tablet to Daniel, and the screen displayed headlines, *, Adrian Holloway, entrepreneur, philanthropist, Forbes 30 under 30, *. There were images of his charitable foundations, his investments, and accolades from global organizations. He was not merely successful, he had quietly built a legacy that dwarfed Daniel's inherited wealth. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some clutched their pearls or wine glasses in disbelief. Others leaned closer, eyes wide, trying to reconcile the man they had dismissed with the powerful figure now revealed. Daniel's face went pale. His lips trembled as he tried to speak, but no words came out. His arrogance, so carefully polished over the years, crumbled like dry clay. The wine glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the marble floor with a sharp, echoing crash that mirrored his sudden collapse in dignity. Adrian's eyes met mine across the room, and for a brief second there was a silent exchange, a confirmation that justice, patience, and strategy had triumphed. There was no need for gloating, no need for vengeance shouted aloud. The humiliation was complete, delivered with elegance and precision. Emma, my daughter, looked from Daniel to Adrian, confusion and awe warring on her face. The truth had been laid bare, unvarnished and undeniable. The man she had married, so certain of his superiority, was now exposed as small, petty, and deeply human. The man she had always trusted, dismissed by others but respected by me, had proven himself in a way no one could ignore. Daniel stammered, finally finding words, but they sounded hollow even to him. I mean. His voice trailed off, broken by the realization that his pride had been shattered in front of the very people whose admiration he had always craved. Adrian did not speak further. He simply straightened his posture, allowed the whispers and astonished murmurs to fill the room, and let the revelation sink into every corner. There was no triumph in his face, only calm dignity, the kind of quiet power that leaves an indelible mark on everyone who witnesses it. For the first time, I saw the full extent of what Adrian had built, not just wealth, but respect, influence, and undeniable authority. And as the guests continued to murmur, and Daniel struggled to regain composure, I felt a profound sense of relief and satisfaction. The insult that had once cut so deeply had been transformed into a triumph more beautiful than any act of revenge could ever be. The storm had broken, and it had revealed its power, not in anger or malice, but in patience, intelligence, and the quiet inevitability of justice. And in that moment, as the shattered wine glass glinted on the floor, I realized something even more profound. Adrian's rise was not only a reckoning for Daniel, it was a revelation for everyone who had ever underestimated the quiet, the overlooked, and the dismissed. The day after the wedding, the house felt different. The echoes of laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the murmured conversations that had once defined the celebration were replaced by a contemplative quiet. The storm had passed, but its effects lingered like the fading scent of a long, extinguished fire. Daniel sat alone in the study, staring blankly at the shattered remnants of his wine glass. He had spent the evening floundering, trying to reclaim the dignity he had so carelessly discarded. But dignity, I realized, could not be reclaimed through excuses or pride. Once lost, it only returned through humility and reflection, lessons he had yet to learn. Adrian, meanwhile, moved through the house with the calm assurance of a man who had finally revealed himself at the precise moment. He did not gloat, did not linger in triumph. To him, the reveal was not an act of cruelty, but a statement of truth. My daughter, Emma, approached him one morning in the garden, sunlight casting a soft halo around her hair. Adrian, I had no idea. She whispered, awe and a hint of guilt in her eyes. I never realized you were all of this. Adrian smiled faintly, the warmth in his eyes tempered by the quiet dignity he always carried. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone, Emma. It was about living with integrity, even when others misjudge you. Wealth, status, and recognition, they mean little compared to respect and trust earned through patience and honesty. I watched them from a distance, a mix of pride and relief swelling in my chest. Adrian had not only defended his own honor, but had done so in a way that reflected the very best of human intelligence and perseverance. His revenge had not been fueled by anger. It had been a calculated assertion of truth, a poetic revelation that left no room for malice. The guests who had attended the wedding gradually began to comprehend the magnitude of what they had witnessed. Whispers turned to admiration, skepticism to respect. Those who had once judged Adrian dismissed as just a servant now sought his counsel, eager to understand the brilliance they had so long ignored. As for Daniel, the journey toward redemption would be longer. In his eyes I saw the first flickers of self-awareness, a dawning realization of how his arrogance had blinded him. There were no words for the humiliation he felt, no quick fixes to restore his fractured pride. But perhaps in time he could learn what so many never do, That respect is earned, not inherited, that the quiet, patient, and observant often wield the greatest power. Weeks passed, and life began to settle into a new rhythm. Adrian continued his work, investing, building, helping, and guiding, but always with that quiet composure that made his influence seem effortless. The household, too, adjusted, embracing a new dynamic where judgment gave way to understanding, and superficial distinctions faded in face of undeniable truth. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of pink and gold, Adrian and I sat together on the veranda. "You know," I said softly, "I always admired you, but this was beyond anything I could have imagined." He looked out at the horizon, thoughtful. The world has a way of testing people, of revealing what they truly are. Some rise with patience and perseverance. Others fall because they mistake arrogance for strength. And Daniel. I asked. Adrian's gaze returned to mine, calm and unwavering. He will learn, perhaps slowly, but the lesson has been set in motion. Sometimes the most powerful transformation is not the one you force upon others, but the one they arrive at themselves through the consequences of their choices. I nodded, understanding the depth of what he meant. Adrian's revenge had not been a fleeting triumph. It was a transformation both for himself and for everyone who had underestimated him. In that quiet, sun-drenched moment, I realized that redemption and justice need not be loud or vengeful. Sometimes they manifest as a quiet, undeniable truth that reshapes the world without shouting. And as the evening faded into night, I felt a sense of peace that had been absent for far too long. The insult, the humiliation, the spark of anger, they had all been transformed into something far greater, a testament to resilience, dignity, and the enduring power of truth. Adrian had risen, Daniel had been humbled, and in the aftermath the world felt just a little more honest and infinitely more just.